Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, it's Science Fiction Saturday once more. I've got two genre films, one from 1959 and one from 2024. And both of them are science fiction in their own way, but each of them slides into different genres a little bit. And I want to talk a bit about that too. First off, thank you to everybody that sent me the lovely messages about having a cold. I'm on the mend now. Had a rough few days, not like deadly rough, but, sleeping badly, snot everywhere, heavy cold kind of stuff. And so my sleep cycle's out of whack. I was eating strepsils like they were popcorn, and my voice occasionally gets this slight roughness to it, but I'm feeling tons better, and the weather's nice. I've got my nephew coming down next week. All is right with the universe, and everything's going to be fine. I shouldn't have said I wasn't going to flatline, because people thought I was going to flatline. And that caused a few moments of concern for the fan base. But everything's huggy and dory. And let's get on with talking about movies. By the way, Luna is guarding the door here, so I'll just see if I can swing around the camera. There she is there guarding the doorway for everybody. And of course she walks away as soon as the camera starts focusing on her. So what have I got for you? Well, what I've got is The Tingler, 1959, science fiction as far as I'm concerned. It's got a scientist in it. It's got scientific experimentation. It's got LSD. It's science fiction. And I've got this groovy old umbrella double release of The Tingler and the Mad Magician, which I was looking through the shelves and I saw it and I thought, I might do The Tingler. Tingler's a lot of fun. And The Tingler does cross genres into murder mystery and also into horror in a big way. That's the first one I'm going to do for you. The second one is a 2024 science fiction movie made in America, but with a Brazilian writer-director. There's a thing called Omni Loop, who stars Mary-Louise Parker, and it's also got Harris Yulin in it. Harris Yulin was in movies in the 60s and 70s. Still around, he's still in movies, and it was nice to see Harris Yulin in a movie. And it's a kind of combination of science fiction, drama and magic realism, because the director, Bernardo Brito, is Brazilian, and there's a large tradition of magic realism in literature and in various narrative works in Central and South America. And so Brito merges science fiction with magic realism in an interesting way in this very small but very interesting film. But we'll start with the one everybody wants to talk about. By the way, stick around to the end of the video, because I'm going to show you all of these double Blu-ray sets that I've got from Umbrella. I've got a bunch of them, and there's some interesting films in them. So I just thought I'd add that at the end of the video just as a bit of an addition. So let's talk about The Tingler, 1959, directed by William Castle. And William Castle gets that bit at the start where he starts talking about the movie and talking about how some people in the cinemas are going to feel The Tingler because he put a whole bunch of industrial strength vibrators under the seats in some cinemas in America. William Castle's kind of low energy in this part at the start of the film. He really needed to stand up straight. His posture is as bad as mine. And he's kind of very, very uncharismatic doing this thing. You can tell he's reading off the cue card. But having him in this film, it's kind of unnecessary, because for a start, everybody who watched the film after, say, about 1960 isn't going to have the vibrators under the seats in the cinema. They're going to be watching on TV or in an encore cinema or on Blu-ray, DVD, whatever. So that part is kind of superfluous to the film. But we get it. Then we get the titles coming up. And we get an insane guy going to the electric chair for a couple of murders he committed. Or did he? Because his brother-in-law later in the film commits a murder. So did the brother-in-law set him up for the murder of the other two people? Is the quiet little bald guy who runs the silent movie cinema actually a serial killer? It's a question you can ask, and I don't have any definitive answers for it, but it's definitely there as part of the narrative. Stars the wonderful Vincent Price, of course, as a doctor called Warren Chapin. He's a pathologist, and he's doing the autopsy on the guy who gets sent to the electric chair and finds out that a whole bunch of his spinal vertebrae are shattered, and it can't be from the convulsions from the electric chair. It's got to be from something else, which leads him on the trail to hypothesize and later on find out that there's a creature, microscopic, which when people are scared and can't express that fear, grows to large fish size and grabs hold of your spine and tries to break your spine. He calls it the Tingler. He gets an x-ray of it through very unusual means, basically by scaring his wife unconscious and then taking x-rays of it, which I believe is something you can get divorces for these days. So it creates this scientific breakthrough that there's something in the human body which is rubbery and unkillable, and which, unless you scream when you're really scared, this thing will break your spine, which would make you really scared of being scared. If everybody knew about the Tingler and knew that if you got really scared, this crabby centipede creature will grow up your spine and start trying to break your back. You'd get a feedback loop there, wouldn't you? Everybody would be so scared of it that it'd break their backs. There's a nasty universe somewhere out there where the Tingler exists and people are too scared to be scared. So Warren, with his assistant, played by Daryl Hickman, who, by the way, as a younger guy, was drowned by Gene Tierney in Leave Her to Heaven, start experimenting and trying to find out more about the Tingler. Warren has a wife called Isabel, played by Patricia Cutts, who's a bit of a nasty bastard. She's rich, she's financed his research, she sleeps around a lot and dresses in cocktail dresses and mocks him as well, because the concept of an open marriage wasn't really around in 1959 in any meaningful way. And so they're sniping at each other. Warren threatens her a number of times with various lethal things if she doesn't give her sister some of the money she inherited through probably killing her father, because the daughter is in love with Daryl Hickman, the pathologist apprentice, and he wants them to get together. So he's kind of creating this narrative that he's going to kill his wife so that his assistant can marry his girlfriend. There's a lot of mixed up narratives in this movie, and I love it for that. So Warren meets Oliver, who runs a silent movie cinema and who is the brother-in-law of the guy who died in the electric chair. He's played by an actor called Philip Coolidge, and he has a certain creepy vibe about him, which is kind of cool for the film. He's a wife called Martha, played by Judith Evelyn, a very famous stage actress in the 1940s, who is what used to be called a deaf mute. She can neither speak nor hear, which is kind of interesting because they're running a silent cinema. There's a little bit of a thread through that. And she also has a number of neurodiversities. She obviously has obsessive compulsive disorder. She's got a germ phobia. She's got a big blood phobia where she goes almost catatonic at the sight of blood, which was always a strange thing to me. Women who are scared of the sight of blood must have real regular trauma in their lives during their adult life as a woman. Let's just put it that way. Not going further on that, but it's something that my mind turns to in these kind of movie situations. And Judith Evelyn is probably probably equal most valuable player in this movie, along with Vincent Price, because she does a lot non-verbally, and her acting is stage large because she was a stage actress. And in fact, Vincent Price recommended her for the role. And so she plays things large, which works well for somebody who can only express themselves through their facial expressions and gestures and sign language. So Warren keeps experimenting to try to find out about this Tingler. He tries to manifest it in himself by using a new drug that's around. And they don't specifically mention it, except to say that it's an acid and it'll give you nightmares while you're awake, which is the way Daryl Hickman's character, his name is Dave, expresses it to the fiancée, Lucy, played by Pamela Lincoln. So he's kind of explaining to the audience what this drug is. People 3 years or 5 years later would have been hip to the fact that it was LSD. So Warren gives himself a fairly strong dose of acid, and he's in his lab, and his lab's got like a skeleton in the corner because he's a pathologist, and the walls closed in on him. He can't seem to open the windows. He starts freaking out, but inevitably he screams because he can't not scream as he's having a really bad trip. So that doesn't work. But then we get the twist in the plot where Ollie scares his wife, played by Judith Evelyn, to death in a very, very William Castle sequence. And because she can't scream, the Tingler doesn't dissipate the way it does in normal people when they scream. It doesn't go back to microscopic size. It stays full size in her. Warren does the autopsy, and the body starts moving after it's dead. And they realise the Tingler is still attached to her spine. Very groovy concept that draws you into this world where this thing is real. And it's made from some kind of organic material, but it's incredibly hard to destroy. It's incredibly strong. And it seems to want to kill people. So there are all these subplots in not a particularly long film. I think it's about 93 minutes, where you've got the Ollie and his wife and their dynamic. You've got Isabel and Warren and their dynamic. You've got the ingenue couple who just are in love and want to get married. You've got the exploration of the Tingler, and the Tingler finally getting loose in the cinema, because Warren plans to reattach the Tingler to Martha's corpse in the hope that it will shrink back to microscopic levels and die. So they're juggling a lot of balls in this movie, and I think they do it really well. There's a striking use of color in one scene, which is very, very cool and unexpected, and I think very appropriate, because most of the movie's in black and white. But there are some scenes of blood that are in color in a very, very tight way. It's got a twist horror ending that I like, and it makes you wonder what happens after that ending. And Vincent Price is really good in it. The scenes where he's supposed to be having a bad acid trip, Price does really well. And his Warren is a really interesting character. He's empathetic to other people, but he's not empathetic to his own wife. And he's willing to be a real bastard to her in order to further his research. So he's a very ambivalent character. He's benign to anybody else except his wife in this film. And even when he finds out that Ollie has killed his wife, Warren is willing to work with him to rectify the situation, and doesn't seem particularly judgmental of him when he discovers that crime. And that scene with the blood is really vivid and showing up when Martha is being scared to death. That was done in a weird way, because what William Castle did to save on special effects is he painted the whole set in black and white and grey. And he painted Judith Evelyn's face with makeup and other things to be black and white and grey, which is why it looks slightly weird in the film. So they filmed that part in colour, but with everything but the blood in the bathtub and the blood in the sink was painted to be monochromatic. And that's kind of an interesting approach to it. It's probably saved them on optical effects. It was cheaper to buy a ton of paint and do that than it was to actually do a process shot for it. So I like that creativity in there as well. But The Tingler is a classic of the genre, but like I said, it slides between a number of genres. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about which genre is a movie. Is this one horror? Is it science fiction? Is it a murder mystery with certain supernatural or supernormal aspects? You can make an argument for any one of those. For me, it sits in a nebulous cloud of genre. Horror, crime, science fiction. It smears through all three of those. And I'm okay with that. I think I'm less prescriptive with genre than I used to be. I used to be a very hard science fiction fan. This thing's science fiction, this thing's science fantasy. I always like to put labels on things. But these days, I'm a little more sanguine about that. And I tend to think, yes, it's not going to get the science right because this one's actually science fiction mixed with horror or science fantasy. Or in the case of the next movie we're going to talk about, Omni Loop, South American magic realism added to a science fiction movie. And I'm kind of okay with that now. I don't mind hard science fiction. I don't mind space opera. I don't mind things set in space. I actually like them. But I'm not particularly going to put them into a pigeonhole, because it just seems like there's no benefit for me. It doesn't do what it does well. Does it use those particular narrative devices and ways of looking at a story well? That's what matters to me these days. And so if something is science fiction, but it also has other genres, other ways of storytelling mixed in with it, I'm going to put aside those labels and just go, does this do this well? And Omni Loop does these things well. As I said, the movie is written and directed by Bernardo Brito, and it stars Mary-Louise Parker as a woman called Zoya Lowe, who's a quantum physicist, and she's just discovered she's dying. She's got about a week to live. And the reason she's dying is she's worked around radiation and high-energy physics all her life. She's just about to turn 55, and there's a black hole formed in her chest, in her sternum, between her lungs. Now, this isn't your Stephen Hawking hard science black hole. It's a void, and eventually it's going to expand enough that it will just basically absorb her and vanish. It'll evaporate. So she's got about a week left, and then that black hole is going to expand and just pop her out. That's your magic realism mixed in with the science. There's a couple of other bits as well, but we'll accept that as what's happening in the movie, even though it is science fiction. Zoya has an ace in the hole. When she was a young girl, she found a bottle of pills in a golf course, and she finds a prescription bottle of pills with her name on them. And if she takes one of these pills, she immediately jumps back 1 week in her life. And she used this as she was a kid, and each time she does that, there's no fewer pills in the bottle because she's jumping backwards in time and has the bottle. And so she's used it to make things easier for herself. She got a career as a quantum physicist. She was starting to explore the nature of time travel, which is what you'd do if you had a time travel pill. Life got ahead of her. She fell in love. She got married. She had a child. Her child's grown up and has a boyfriend now. And then in all but 55 years of age, she finds out she's got a week to live because this black hole buried in her chest. And Zoya does what a lot of people would do. Just as her nose starts bleeding, which is one of the kind of precursors of the black hole absorbing all of her, and this black hole doesn't seem to have any gravity effects, she goes into the bathroom on each time loop, takes one of the pills and jumps back a week so she can experience her life again and give herself more time to figure out what she can do about this. For a long time, and we don't know how long, and she must spend a very, very long time doing this, Zoya just lives the same week again. She gets told of the diagnosis by her doctor and her daughter. She goes and gets her will done with her husband, family, and the family trying to look after her and give her a birthday party. All of the same stuff where she's being kind of micromanaged by the people who love her in what they see as the last week of her life. Eventually this drives her a bit nuts, as indeed it would anybody. And there's a lot of narrative in here that talks about palliative care and the obligations on the dying person, the obligations of the family members, and how they can sometimes not be the same thing. But then Zoya makes a decision. She nicks out of the hospital on one of the loops and goes to try to find the research she lost years ago when she was exploring time travel and trying to get it done within a week to see whether she can actually find a way to analyze these pills, which have a very strange structure down to the subatomic level, and whether she can do something about this. She finds a quantum physicist student called Paula, played by Ayo Edebiri, who she convinces that she's been traveling through time. And the strange thing is, Paula has one of Zoya's old textbooks that was her copy of her own book. And they form this bond over these time loops. So Zoya and Paula find an old kind of abandoned lab at a university college and start trying to find out what's happening. They have an old teacher there who used to teach Zoya when she was young, and he's 107 years old. And his name is Professor Dusselberg, played by Harris Yulin. And he gets some really interesting little beats in there. And they steal from his office a little glass case which has the most unusual human being in the world in it, the nanoscopic man. It's a guy who was part of a scientific experiment that went wrong and is constantly shrinking down, just like in The Incredible Shrinking Man. He's in a suit. He can be communicated with a little box on the side of this glass case he's in. And apparently he's a very cool dude. And they're going to use him to try to analyze these pills at a subatomic level because he's already at a subatomic level. They got this weird side plot of this nanoscopic man who is helping them with their research. I love that shit. It works really well. We only see the nanoscopic man right at the end of the film. And that's a nice little grace note for it as well. And so Zoya and Paula try to work this stuff out. While this is all happening, Zoya doesn't see her family because she's focused on the research. She wants to try to get this problem solved so she can spend 20, 30, 40 years with her family. But she doesn't see them for a number of time loops. And eventually she misses them because it's been subjective years for her since she's seen her family. She goes and gets some closure with an old flame with whom she had a fling. She tries to find the guy she used to work with on her research and finds out that he's died and his son is still dealing with his grief about the death of his father. And so you get all these personal threads tied together. And there comes a resolution point in the movie, which I'm not going to spoil because I want you to watch it. I want you to go out on that journey. And yes, I've said go on that journey, but this one, it's valid to say that. Things move into the future in an interesting way. Like I said, no spoilers on that. Now, this is one of those small movies again. It's a Sundance level movie. It's a streaming service level movie. I believe it is on Amazon in a lot of markets. So you can watch it on Amazon Prime if you want to. But I think it's a delicate film. And it's a film that does talk a lot about family and grief and mortality with a nice leavening of science fiction in there. And it shows just how hard it is to do scientific research. And so there's a lot of that hard science in there. But there's also magic realism with this black hole inside a woman. And is the black hole her somewhat fractious relationship with her family? Is it grief for her parents? Is it grief for her own life? What is it? It's a metaphorical thing which can have a number of meanings. I like this one. It's filmed in Miami. And there are lots of little bits of business in this movie. Like there's a park in Miami. And this is set in the future, but not necessarily our future. And the last rhinoceros in the world is on display in this park. And then as the narrative happens, in that week that Zoya is reliving over and over again in various scenarios, the last rhino in the world dies. And the world goes into grief about that. There's a lot of those little grace notes in there that just make it a little bit deeper and a little bit more interesting than it might have been. I mean, this movie could have been played as a screwball comedy. It does have aspects of Groundhog Day to it. But it's something of its own. And Mary-Louise Parker is very good in this. Her character grows on you as the movie progresses, just as the character goes through some emotional and reality growth of her own. And Ayo Edebiri is very good as Paula in a role where she spends most of the movie confused about what's happening. But then eventually her and Zoya form a kinship, which is quite touching and quite apt and leads to part of the resolution to the plot of the movie. I like this one. I think that some of the other supporting players aren't necessarily as good as the three leads, Harris Yulin, Ayo Edebiri, and Mary-Louise Parker, but they're serviceable in that. The locations are incredibly well chosen in and around Miami, and it's one of those little hidden gem movies, which, you know, you're not going to expect it to be pew pew, bang bang, zoom zoom, going across the galaxy kind of science fiction. It is, in a sense, science fiction. The impact of technology on a human being. In this case, the technology is a black hole in her heart and a box of pills that let her travel back in time 1 week. Give it a go if you haven't seen it. And again, it's one of those low-key movies that's going to disappear eventually from streaming services. And for a time, at least, it'll probably be forgotten. But it's worth checking out now while you can. So then we move on to all of these double features. Umbrella no longer do, and they're out of print at Umbrella. But if you spot them around, they're worth getting. Of course, they're in DVD ratio on Blu-ray discs, but they're kind of cool. And I still see them around sometimes, very occasionally, in places like JB Hi-Fi. I've even seen a couple of them in op shops, but they were ones I already had. So I'll just go through them briefly and show you what Umbrella was doing and how cool the double features they had were. You got the Mad Magician and the Tingler. I already had a copy of the Tingler, but I didn't have the Mad Magician, so I picked that one up a couple of years ago. There's Colossus of Forbin Project and Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. These are all Region B, by the way. So got those two, which is a good double feature. Again, these are in widescreen. They're not in pan and scan at all. The Andromeda Strain and the Ground Star Conspiracy. Couple of good 70s techno thrillers there. This one I'm in love with. They're TV pilots, and I didn't like either of them particularly much. Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Neither of which has aged well at all. Never liked the series in the 70s. Don't like them in the 2020s either. These older ones, retro sci-fi double feature, it says. There are a few volumes of this. I'm not sure if I got them all, but I've got these. The Mole People in the Land Unknown. 1950s ones. These are kind of rare, and I like the fact that they were released here in Australia. The Mole People is a lost world adventure, as indeed is The Land Unknown. Both of them worth checking out. This is probably the best of these retro science fiction double features. The Monolith Monsters and the Deadly Mantis. The Monolith Monsters is fantastic. I love that one. And the Deadly Mantis is a lot of fun as well. This one is a classic. Dr. Cyclops, and from the 1950s, Cult of the Cobra, which was a Columbia programmer. Dr. Cyclops is definitely one to have in your collection. And it looks fantastic in saturated Technicolor as well. Again, the aspect ratio of Dr. Cyclops is in old school 3:2 because that was the Academy ratio they had before everything widescreen in the 50s. Retro Horror Triple Feature Volume 3. The Invisible Man Returns, The Invisible Woman, and Invisible Agent. These are programmers by Universal from the 1940s, but it's good to have them on a disc. I don't particularly need them in 4K or Blu-ray, but I just like having them in the collection. I can pop them in and just binge watch them whenever I choose to. This is a really good one. Island of Lost Souls and The Black Cat, both from the 1930s. 1932 and 1934 respectively. That's a good double feature on any disc. Now we've got our Retro Horror double feature volume 2. Two Christopher Lee movies, Circus of Fear and The Bloody Judge, both from the 1960s. These really good transfer, by the way. They found good original source material for this one. And if you want to fill in the gaps of your Christopher Lee collection, that's the one to do it with. This one's still available on Umbrella's website. I Aim at the Stars and Man on a String, Amazing True Tales Volume 1. This one's a biopic of Werner von Braun, which a lot of English people didn't like it at all because they were still picking up the rubble 15 years later. And von Braun did work on the V-2 rockets. And Man on a String's a Cold War drama with Ernest Borgnine. Interesting film. I Aim at the Stars has not aged particularly well. This one's good. Second part of a TV pilot for a series I didn't care for. But the first one, White Line Fever and Airwolf. White Line Fever is a good truck exploitation movie from the 70s with Jan Michael Vincent and Kay Lenz. That one I recommend. That's a good double feature movie to have with Convoy, which has just got a release from Imprint on 4K. White Line Fever and Convoy. You'd have a lot of fun watching those two back to back. Still got two more. Ray Harryhausen double feature. First, Men in the Moon and 20 Million Miles to Earth. That's a nice little double feature there. And Harryhausen stuff, I've got a few Blu-rays of it around. I like having these two to go. They're in the correct aspect ratios. And yes, I could upgrade at least one of them to a higher resolution, but I don't really feel the need to. I'd rather spend the money on something I haven't got already. And the last one is Icons of the Silver Screen, The Big Clock, and This Gun for Hire with Ray Milland and Alan Ladd. 1940s classic films. The Big Clock's really interesting. Was that directed by John Farrow? Yes, it was. And This Gun for Hire with Alan Ladd is the movie that made Alan Ladd a star. So those two I like a lot. Yeah, I'm glad I got all of these double feature discs from Umbrella. They fill gaps in the collection nicely. They're solid little films. And again, I don't mind the fact that there's two of them on one Blu-ray disc. I'm not going to be a size queen about these things. I'm not particularly worried about that. But so that's what I got for you this time. Two science fiction movies from different eras, but both of which blur the definition of science fiction. All of these double features that I got, look around for them. See if you can find them on eBay if you can't find them anywhere else. You might have a good time and start yourself a collection. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for bearing with my slightly rough throat. Though I don't have a throat thing, I've got a head cold. Usual things. Please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell and leave a comment. Tell me what you think of all of these films or just the two I mentioned at the start. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, donating through YouTube, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies, which is my preferred option because I get paid in American dollars and the Australian dollar is tanking at the moment because everybody is scared of things that are happening in odd corners of North America. So next up, I've got the Monday video and the Wednesday video, and I'm going to have to record them early because my nephew's turning up, and I'm not going to be recording videos while I've got a 14-year-old running around the house. We're going to see a movie together. You want to guess what it is? We're going to see Sonic 3 at the cinema because he and I always go to see a movie when we turn up on each other's doorsteps. I haven't seen the first two Sonic movies. I'm going to go in cold, and I'm going to review on the channel, and I may even put him on the camera to give his review of Sonic 3, just for shits and giggles. So until all of that marvelous stuff happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some old double features, and just have a great time, and I'll catch you next time.